Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak here this evening about my project for Mifgs this year, which we called A Place for Us. As you know, my name's Emma. I was the lucky recipient of the $10,000 OGV Giving Grant earlier this year. I'm a student here at Burnley studying the graduate certificate in horticulture. Although my background is in landscape architecture and I run a small business called Planetary Landscape Architecture. Before we begin, I'd like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we meet today, so the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I also pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Okay, so I'm going to start this presentation with a bit of a confession. So until earlier this year, I had actually never been to any garden show, let alone Mifgs. So I honestly came into this process as a total show newbie. The only thing I can say I knew about show gardens was from magazine photos, where I'd seen them before, where they seem both impossibly beautiful and somehow untouchable and almost kind of like a theatre set. But having been through this experience in February and March, I now know that there is so much more to show gardens than just a pretty picture at the end. Just like any creative work, show gardens involve a complex process of planning, making, collaboration, and perhaps just a touch of insanity. So I'd really like to tell you about the behind the scenes version of A Place for Us. I'll first talk about the beginnings of the project and how the idea unfolded from a tentative design to a complex project involving many different moving parts. Then I'll explain a bit about how we built the garden, the public's response to it, and then finally the legacy of A Place for Us now and into the future. So when I first heard about the competition late last year, I was immediately drawn to the idea of designing a show garden for Mifgs and working together with OGV to achieve this. For the competition entry, I arrived at three main themes that I wanted to explore through the design. So firstly, gardens as places for social connection. Secondly, places for biodiversity. And thirdly, the construction site as a place for female landscapers. And that was how I arrived at the name for the project, A Place for Us. Here is the original render from my entry. And as you can see here, colour was a really important part of the early concept. And this was reflected in the wall edging and the flower meadow at the front of the space. I especially wanted to create a place that reflected the really important role that gardens and plants had played for many people during the COVID lockdowns, especially in supporting physical and mental health throughout this time. And I know that was the case for myself and my family. I've always loved gardens that are kind of wild, and to this end, I wanted to design as much variability into this garden as I could. And above all, I wanted it to feel accepting and a place where people would feel welcome to come into the space, to sit a while, and just simply feel like they were part of a broader system, an ecosystem. So this is the first planting plan that I developed. The main idea here was to encourage biodiversity through the use of a wide variety of native plants, as well as incorporating natural materials such as timber, stone, logs, and crushed rock into the design. The species were selected according to what would be flowering or at its best during the week of the show in early April, which was really hard to plan because plants generally don't care much about human schedules. The planting plan eventually changed as well due to a range of supply issues, which I'll talk about a bit later on. The design had lots of nooks and crannies for habitat, found in the gabion wall, in amongst the different types of plants in the design, and in the variation created by debris such as timber logs, mulch and boulders down at the ground level. By including these, I wanted to demonstrate how native gardens can be a real refuge for the many types of animals, insects, and even the microscopic creatures that live in suburban areas. Water management is also an important factor for biodiversity, and I originally included a small rain garden and rock drainage channel. While this idea was also modified in the final design, water collection was still reflected in other ways. But perhaps the most prominent meaning of a place for us was the idea that women have an important role to play in the landscaping and construction industries. And this was reflected by the intention to have the garden built by an all-female construction team. And after we did a bit of research on this, it soon became apparent that this was actually the first time that this would have been attempted in the history of Mifgs. The intention was to both showcase the work of women currently working in the landscaping industry, as well as to encourage women who might be considering a career in this area. And if we just take a look at the statistics around this, you can see that there is limited female participation in certain sectors of the industry. So in 2023, women made up around 5% of the total workforce in landscaping, and this was even less in other sectors of the industry such as carpentry and stonemasonry, which have 2% and 1% respectively. In comparison, female participation in design and horticulture is relatively high, which is great, but clearly more needs to be done to encourage women into the construction sectors as well. A vital way to do this is through positive representation. So that is showing the diverse range of women who already work in the industry. And this can be a really powerful force for change and was one of the aims of our project. Yet getting into the industry in the first place can be really difficult. Many of our volunteers had really similar stories actually of applying for a trade apprenticeship early on in their careers, only to find that very few businesses would give them a go. And this is possibly because women were perceived as a risky choice for the business, but in the end we really don't know why that is, because there's not a lot of transparency around the issue. So for this reason, it's also important to challenge gendered assumptions about male and female work practices, really to encourage businesses to take on more female employees and for more women to feel confident in applying for these roles in the first place. So these were the main driving ideas behind the competition entry, and I was really, really overjoyed to find out that I'd been awarded the grant from OGV in late January. And at that point it was all systems go, and the next 7 weeks involved a whirlwind of planning and preparations. The very first week involved contacting lots of different people and just cold calling them to try and pick their brains about the process of building a show garden. So some of these people that I spoke to included John Rayner and Claire Farrell, my lecturers at Burnley, David Reed at the NGIV, Megan Flower at Landscaping Victoria, Jack Semler from Superbloom, and Emma Hurd and Beck Bennett at Encouraging Women in Horticulture, Martin Semkin from Semkin Landscaping, and I also got in touch with the Mifgs organiser Trent Cornish, who provided help and advice throughout the process. So all of these people were incredibly generous with their time, knowledge and networks, and they all gave me lots of great tips about where to start. So that was a really encouraging beginning. The project management side of things was also really important, given that we only had 7 weeks to create the garden from go to show. So one of the first things I did was to create a project plan and schedule. And this was an evolving document which just help to keep the whole thing on track. But as you can see from this video, there's a lot of juggling and multitasking going on. Scheduling was very important as there were lots of things that needed to happen in a sequence. For example, I had to finalise the construction drawings before getting certification for these, before I could start ordering any building supplies, before we could start any kind of construction. So you could see it was quite dependent, the steps were quite dependent on each other. In early February, I met Karen and Trent at the Carlton Gardens, where we looked at 2 potential options for the site. And the site we ended up choosing was on a corner of 2 paths, which we thought would be better for maximising the number of people passing by. But it also had a slight slope, and together with Mifgs requirements for site protection, I realised that I would need to modify the original design to suit this site. So here you can see the 2 renderings of the garden side by side, showing the before and after changes. As you can see in the second image, the plants and materials are similar, but some other changes were made, including removing the side walls and changing the back wall colour to blue. And this layout allowed us to open up the garden to a triangular shape, creating a more open and calming feel in the space. The path internally was also extended to provide an exit for the garden, and the whole structure was raised up around 400 millimetres off the ground. The main reason for this was the need for site protection at the Carlton Gardens, which meant that we couldn't actually disturb the ground at all, so no footings and no earthworks were allowed. After researching how other show gardens were built, I decided that the easiest solution would be to create a stage of sorts and build the whole garden up on top of this stage. So in a way, it was actually like a theatre set. Refining the construction drawings took about 3 weeks. So the design of the stage platform and timber wall took up the majority of this time because I needed to make sure that they would be structurally sound and also able to withstand extreme weather. So if we had high winds or extreme rain or something like that. We ended up using a deck pedestal system and bolting the wall to one end of this. Ballast was also required on the other side of the wall, so it was actually quite a complex structure in the end. To make sure that this was built properly, I engaged a structural engineer and a building designer to make sure that the final drawings would pass inspection from Mifgs and the City of Melbourne. But by this point, it was getting pretty complex and the budget was starting to be stretched as well. There were also many hidden costs that I hadn't originally factored in, including insurance, transportation costs, electricity, and protective flooring. So after getting the okay from OGV, I started looking for some in-kind sponsorship. And in the end, 29 companies provided support in the form of materials, advice, and/or labour. In the later stages of the project, our website became a crucial part of the relationship that we had with sponsors. And this was put together by one of our volunteers as well, Sarah Monaghan from the Creative Assistant. So she did an excellent job. The sponsorship arrangements also provided some great opportunities for industry networking. One example was our relationship with Shapescaper. It's a local Melbourne business that provides steel edging for gardens. So Shapescaper not only provided free steel edging for our garden, and that was well over $1,000 worth, they manufactured it to the exact dimensions required and they delivered it to us at the show, which saved us countless hours and a heap of stress on site. They also lent us their apprentice, Phoenix, who did some work for us In here she is hard at work on the tools. She got some valuable experience working with our team of female landscapers. We got the benefit of her specialist skills, and Shapescaper received publicity and potential future work from the landscapers on the team. So it was really a win-win for everyone involved and a positive experience for us all. But perhaps the most important feature of show gardens is the plants. And for most show gardens, the plants are simply placed in their pots with a layer of mulch on top. So they're not actually planted into the garden. So all of the species needed to be quite large or densely planted to give the illusion of a finished garden. However, when we approached some of the larger Melbourne nurseries a few weeks before the show, they told us that they'd already been cleared out of most of their advanced stock by the other Mifgs teams. And in many cases, the plants had been ordered and grown even up to a year in advance. So we realised that we were quite behind, and we were starting to get a bit concerned that our garden would have no plants at all. So in the last couple of weeks, I and a couple of the volunteers drove around some nurseries in regional Victoria to source native plants that would be large enough for the garden. And here you can see us at Avalon Nursery, where they just happened to have an all-female team in the nursery on the day that we visited, so that was quite cool as well. Our main plant supplier ended up being a small business in Daylesford called The Secret Garden. And in this video you can see our horticulturist Jack wandering around this wonderful nursery, where we just fell in love with all of the plants and wanted to buy absolutely everything. But this was just a small retail nursery, so unfortunately there was no sponsorship, and the cost of these plants ended up taking up a large part of our budget, but they were totally worth it in the end. And a special shout out goes to Jack for finding this hidden plant oasis. And so this brings me to the subject of our volunteers. Early on, I'd thought that I would be able to build the garden with the assistance of a couple of students and some paid landscapers perhaps. However, I soon realised that budget didn't really allow for this, and also that I was going to need a larger team of professional tradies, as well as a range of general volunteers for the project. Given that I'd also specified an all-female team, I decided to approach encouraging women in horticulture to see if they could put out a call to their members for any female volunteers with trade skills, which they were really happy to do, and they were very supportive of the project. This turned out to be the best move that I could have made, because within 3 days I'd received an absolute flood of emails and calls from women in different trades who were keen to volunteer and to be part of the team. So I was very, very lucky. The total team involved 23 wonderful women who all contributed to the project in different ways. You can see in this diagram the incredible diversity of skills that we had across the team, from construction trades such as carpentry and landscaping, to horticulture and design, social media specialists and artists. And many of the volunteers also called upon professional networks of their own to assist, so the project just leapt ahead and snowballed from then on. The team was also quite varied in terms of age, life situation and their place of residence. And you can see a few demographics here which show the different backgrounds that we were all coming from. Everyone donated time away from their busy lives, which included full-time work, running small businesses, caring responsibilities, studies, and in some cases, all of the above. And as everyone at OGV would be aware, the volunteering was both time intensive and rewarding all at the same time. To provide a couple of examples, this is Anna, who is one of the first volunteers to put her hand up for the project. And you can see her here testing out our stage with her impressive ballet skills. A few weeks in, I asked Anna if she'd be willing to take on a 2IC role in the project, which she was. And this was another really lucky break because Anna's background in transport, logistics and landscaping made her a really integral member of the team. This clip was actually the first day we met at the Carlton Gardens, where we measured up all the levels of the site in the rain. I just rocked up with a 6-metre tape measure and some string, whereas Anna turned up with a professional laser measure, various measuring tools, a time-lapse camera and tripod, and even an extra jacket for me when it started raining. So as you can see, Anna's experience on site really increased our efficiency. And this is another of our volunteers, Shannon Blackburn, who is a professional landscaper and also a mother of 4, including 2 toddlers. She's also a small business owner in Canberra. Shannon made the 9-hour drive down to Melbourne in her ute with all of her tools to spend the week at the gardens just helping us out. So this level of generosity was really typical of the team and reflected the enthusiasm that the volunteers brought to the project, as well as their passion for supporting other women working in the industry. And here's a page just dedicated to the volunteers because their involvement was absolutely key to the success of this project, especially in the later stages. I personally found the team's support to be one of the most positive aspects of the project, and everyone worked incredibly well together. As a bonus, we all gained a long-term network of female landscapers and able to share resources, advice and work between us, so it will hopefully have long-term benefits for everyone involved. Okay, so moving on to the bump-in. This involves 6 days on the site where we put all of our preparations to the test to build the garden. 6 days may sound like a long time, but it went by very quickly with all that was going on. And it was actually quite daunting because not only had we never built or visited a show garden before, most of the team had never even met each other before day 1. But everything went amazingly well, very smoothly, with just a couple of hiccups along the way, which we figured out as we went along together. We had various team members and deliveries coming on different days, so scheduling and project management kept me very busy, while Anna was coordinating the volunteers and chasing up supplies. This map here shows the location of all of our suppliers in a 100-kilometre radius from the Carlton Gardens. So you can get some sense of the distances covered in getting all of the supplies to and from the show and the complexity of the logistics of organising that. We had 3 main teams on the site, so construction team, a horticulture team and the general volunteers, although everyone ended up being very flexible and just chipping in where they were needed on site. The construction team played an important role in the first couple of days to build the timber wall and the subfloor platform. This was probably the most complex part of the construction, so it was a real relief when it was finally complete. We were also very lucky to have Kate Ashton from Kate Ashton Landscaping on site, who stepped up into the role of site manager to crack the whip and direct the construction and keep us to the schedule. However, we weren't the only team building a garden at the Carlton Gardens, so it was absolute chaos with all of the trucks, machinery and deliveries that were happening around us. At times the queue for vehicles to get into the gardens was several hours long, and our volunteers could get caught up in this traffic when they were trying to come in. And just to make things even crazier, the Melbourne weather decided to join in with a thunderstorm and flash flooding on day 2 of the build, and here's the soundtrack. This soaked all of the stockpiles that we had on site, including the timber and mulch, and made things pretty muddy during the build. The edging, gabion wall and the path were next, and these took up most of days 3 and 4 of the build. At one point I tried to get a stonemason in to build the gabion wall, But female stonemasons are really hard to come by, so all of us had to just take a crash course in stonemasonry. I think it was a pretty successful result. And from this point onwards, the design came together really smoothly as we all got into our stride and figured out issues as they came up. After the plants were delivered, the horticulturist stepped up to look after the plants before arranging them into the garden beds. All of the plants were placed directly onto the platform in their pots and then top dressed with a layer of bark mulch. There was a fair bit of shuffling plants around to get the best arrangement, so creative skills were also really important in this last phase. While it sounds like a linear process, in reality there were many jobs all happening at once. So in this clip, for example, you can see Kate busy wiring up the gabion wall while Jacqueline is placing the plants according to the design plans. So lots of multitasking. And the finishing touches for the design were put on by our artist Claire James, who I commissioned to create an artwork that reflected the themes of biodiversity and inclusion. So early in the project, I went out to Claire's studio at Healesville and we talked through some ideas for the art. And then over 6 weeks, Claire produced a set of 3 petri dish artworks that were inspired by the smallest creatures of the garden: fungi, bacteria, insects, invertebrates and reptiles, drawing attention to the importance of these often overlooked creatures in relation to biodiversity. We also had a beautiful video projection that was created by video artist Grace Wood. This was projected onto the front of the garden for the Twilight Gardens event during the show. So finally the show arrived and we got to the fun bit, showing the garden and talking to people during the 4 days of the show. We don't have as many photos of this because we were so busy chatting. We also got some great coverage in the media, and the marketing for the project played a huge role in this. So here's the final results. Our all-female team was amazing, worked incredibly well together to design and construct the garden, so we're very proud of what we'd achieved. In terms of the media, a few weeks in we met Kate Anderson from the OGV marketing team, who got the ball rolling with a media release for the project. Thanks to Kate's efforts, I was approached by journalist Megan Backhouse of The Age for an interview. A Place for Us was one of 2 gardens that Megan wrote about for her 2023 piece on Mifgs in The Age, so we're really thrilled to receive this kind of recognition. Some other print media coverage included Hort Journal, the Ballarat Courier, Ballarat Times and the Melbourne University Newsroom. But the absolute highlight was having Costa and the crew from Gardening Australia visit our garden and film a segment for the show, as well as being featured in Gardening Australia magazine and Costa's social media. So it was such a memorable experience meeting Costa, who was as enthusiastic, friendly and genuine in real life as he is on the show. And Gardening Australia featured interviews with myself, Anna and Claire discussing the garden and OGV and our intention to support women in landscaping. Costa also followed up by posting A Place for Us on his own social media platforms and by arranging an interview with Dominic Knight on ABC Radio's Sydney Drive program. When you tally up the audience of these publications, you're looking at a potential audience of 7,600,000 people on print, TV and radio. This was the best publicity that we could have hoped for, and it was certainly a career high for most of the team. But finally, the icing on the cake was winning the Best Visual Display Exhibitor Prize at Mifgs for OGV. And this was awarded on the basis of judges who had observed our construction process over the whole week, as well as the final visual result and reaction of members of the public towards the garden. Speaking to many show visitors during the 4 days, we found that many people found the garden to be a warm, welcoming and something that they could imagine in their own gardens at home. This was exactly the impact we were after, so this feedback meant as much to us as all of the other recognition. So this was a great conclusion to the show and recognition for all of our hard work and effort into the planning, construction and promotion of the garden over the past 7 weeks. The female team was amazing, but we can't forget the many men who cheered us on along the way as well. And this includes the amazing show staff and organisers, colleagues and friends who gave their generous advice, as well as our partners caring for kids and pets back at home. It would have been difficult to achieve as much as we did without their support. And this also connects to the broader intentions of A Place for Us, which was never about excluding men from the process, but rather about drawing attention to the vital role that men can play in supporting women to work in traditionally male-dominated industries. The men that we all met at Mifgs were great, and we thoroughly enjoyed working with them all. So to summarise, while the experience was certainly a lot of planning and hard work, it was also a huge amount of fun, and you can see this from the photos. We met some wonderful people in the industry, increased our professional networks, made some great friends, and increased our belief in what we can do. The amazing reception that the project received has convinced us that there's a lot of need for further work in this area, and we're hoping to maintain this momentum by setting up a professional support network for women in landscaping. So keep on watching this space. But finally, we'd like to say a heartfelt thanks to Open Gardens Victoria for supporting us with your generous giving grant and helping our project fly. We hope it was as beneficial for you as it was for us, and we really look forward to seeing next year's student garden at Mifgs. Thank you all for listening. I'd like to open it up to any questions from the audience.